And my apologies, but we are done with freedom.
I'm not sure why.
Really? No more freedom?
No more freedom. No more freedom.
I don't know why this one.
Okay, so we're looking at our therapeutic culture. So there'll be a little bit of summary so we get us up to speed, but the presentation is about 25, 30 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have a few moments for sharing and response. And I think some of the issues they may be provocative, and hopefully it will give us a basis for having good conversation. So this is where we're starting. We're arguing that in our culture today in general, I don't think there's a one word or one ideology that covers all aspects of our culture, but individualism would be good as any other in terms of the core of where our society is, and that individualism generates other themes within our culture. So we looked at freedom last week. We want to look at a therapeutic world that individualism has given birth to, so that when we look at individualism, the way we want to define it, this is the fundamental lie of modernity. This is Alan Noble, that we are our own, we belong to ourselves. That's the heart of individualism. And that since we belong to ourselves, we are responsible for the meaning in our life, meaning both in terms of purpose, value, identity, all aspects of our lives, we are ultimately responsible for it. So that freedom is required in order for us to be responsible in a responsibly way. So the ability to do so if you have an individual and they're making a choice between being single or married, in order for them to actualize who they are, they have to have the freedom so that they can choose responsibly whether they want to get married or stay single. That's why we started off with freedom, because that's such a crucial aspect of. And then freedom, there are two different ways in which freedom is categorized. You have negative freedom, so freedom from people interfering with you. The common illustration would be like slavery, where you are oppressed by a stronger power. And then you have positive freedom, which is the ability to live out your desires, your values. That's future oriented. And so you have those two types of freedom. And what we pointed out last week is that individualism works well with negative freedom. They want to set you free so that you can choose without any oppressive constraint upon you. But it doesn't do so well with positive freedom in that giving you the tools to make choices so that your inner reality, who you are, comes out within society and the world in which you live in. But the fact that we are in a world of individualization, the illustration, let me just start off to illustrate this, would be abortion. So that on the pro-life side, when does life start? What does it mean to be a person? And then on the pro-choice side, that would be I own my body, and then I have the freedom to choose what I do with my body, would be a huge element in the way that they interact with the abortion debate. So that when you look at should a woman have an abortion or not, there are some factors that are medically related, but many of these are related to what the patient wants. Do I want to be a parent? Am I ready to be a parent? Can I be a parent of this child and still parent my kids who I already have well? A lot of these factors are questions about the individual's internal reality. And individualism would argue that they need to be true to yourself. In other words, make decisions that are true to your inner experiences, desires, wants, and values. The question is, who would you go to if you have difficulty discerning what you feel and what you want? In our culture, it's a therapist. It is a therapist. The priesthood of individualism is therapy. In fact, in the olden day, if a priest, the primary calling of a priest is to help you to get in touch with God, the primary calling of a therapist is to help you get in touch with yourself. Yeah. A good therapist doesn't tell you what to do. They help you to see what you want to do. and then give you words of encouragement and the relational dynamics for you to carry it out. Therapy. In fact, did you know at Moody, when I was there 20 years ago and before, Bible theology was the #1 major. We had the most students in that major. 3 years before I left, it shifted. Bible theology lost. Guess who they lost to? Counseling. Counseling is the #1 program. In fact, you know the guy that wrote 5 Love Languages? He published with Moody. Moody made so much money off of him. And he was so grateful to Moody that he donated millions of dollars so that they have an actual building just for counseling set aside, of which even Bible theology do not have their own building. We share it with everyone else. Because there's so many people going into counseling and so many people who want counseling that you can't find a therapist these days, especially male therapists. Because everyone wants a therapist because they want to know, how do I deal with the pain in the past? Does it affect the way what I want, how I see myself? Because it is all about the self, actualizing in an external world. So the question I want to ask is, how do we get here? How do we get here? I'm only have 2 points today. How did we get here? And I'm working with 2 different books. One of the books is by Philip Reef, and the other one is by Carl Trueman. So Carl Trueman says, look, there's a tremendous shift that's occurred in our world, a tremendous shift. Now, obviously, we can parse this in many different ways, but the way that he wants to parse it is in terms of the psychological dynamics. We are, you ever like on a roller coaster and you're at the top and you're starting to go down, it's kind of slow. And by the time you're in the bottom, you're just going super fast. What he's arguing is the slow part occurred around the 17th, 18th century. We are on the bottom of that rung where changes are occurring within less than decades. So he says, look, if you tell my father in the 1950s, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, he will look at you like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Or he would think that was the punchline of a joke. But it would not compute to him what a 20th or 1st century teenager would think of when they hear, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body. The dynamics of their mental interaction with the statement is completely different from someone from the 1950s, right? How courageous that this individual, after having lived as a man for decades and having won the gold medal of decathlon, suddenly realizes that in his inner being, he is a woman. But he doesn't hide it. He doesn't pretend he's not a woman and is a man. In fact, she has the courage to come out and be true to themselves. In other words, their outer reality is aligned with their inner reality rather than your inner reality aligning with your outer reality. That's the fundamental shift that's occurred. So that Trueman says, look, and this text is, what does he have? 1,858 reviews for a Christian book, 5 out of 5? I mean, this is one significant text. And he's tracing the history of how we got to a point where within 50 years, you went from, what in the world are you talking about? To, let's lift this individual up as a model of courage. So he writes, look, how did such a strange idea, now by strange idea, he's not giving you a moral evaluation of it. Instead, what he means is an idea that had no history before. How did this strange idea become common orthodox currency of our culture? When my daughter applied to Northwestern, there was only 2 boxes to check, male, female. When she graduated 4 years later, there were 6 boxes, of which 2 of which I don't understand. But there's 6 boxes, the choices have exploded, because if your individual inner world is different and you're actualizing it, it's not in the categories, you don't fit into the categories, you make the categories fit into you. It's that reversal that's the fundamental shift that's occurred within our culture. So that, he says, look, to leap ahead, transgenderism provides, Transgenderism provides an excellent example. People who think there are women trapped in a man's body are really making their inner psychological convictions absolutely decisive for who they are, and to the extent that prior to coming out, they have publicly denied their inner reality. To that extent, they have had an inauthentic life. But the key value of individualism is to have an authentic life. So what Truman argues is, look, before you had Rene Descartes, who think, I think, therefore I am, has now been modified. I think I'm a woman, therefore I am a woman. And the outer reality will now align with my inner reality. What shifted? A fundamental cultural shift has occurred. The language of social imagery, or if you have heard the phrase worldview, they're similar, but there's a shift in worldview. Social imagery or worldview are shared beliefs and stories which make certain practices acceptable. So that in the 1920s or earlier, let's say in My Three Sons generation, that it would certainly, transgenderism would not even be would not even compute. Whereas, this picture? That's Modern Family. Do you guys know that? The Modern Family, where you have one gay couple, and then the father is married to someone who's very young, the same age as the daughter, so that their son is an uncle who is younger than the children of the daughter. In other words, it's mixed family, right? So it's a modern family. So from here to there, what Truman argues is that there's a fundamental shift that's occurred, and he's trying to help us to understand how that occurred. Now, here, what he's saying is, for almost thousands of years, the shift didn't occur. Suddenly, certain things happen, and then the shift occurred like an avalanche. So if I say, I am an evangelical Christian, and I said that in the medieval Paris, right? I mean, that word evangelical wouldn't compute anyway. But if I said I am a fundamentalist Bible-believing Christian, right? So what? I mean, 99% of the people who lived in Paris at that time, that's part of their plausibility structure. But if you go to modern Paris today and say, I'm an evangelical Christian, they're like, well, you don't belong here. Move back to Texas. Because in modern Paris today, it's 1% to 2% are evangelical Christians. The majority of Christians in Paris are those who are only in name. Okay. Second illustration, homosexuality. So that prior to, let's say, the 1950s and all the way back to church tradition, all the way back to the beginning of the church, let's say, it's declared as a sin, which is a moral issue, right? Sin is a moral issue. Homosexuality is a sin prior to 1950s, let's say. In 1952, it's recategorized as a psychological term. From theological to psychological, that it is not a moral issue, but some type of neurosis. So that's categorized as part of a sociopathic personality disturbance, or those that are prone to being antisocial. And homosexuality is listed there, 1952. In 1972, it was removed from the DSM-V. It's no longer a psychological issue. It's acceptable, relationally acceptable in 1972. That's a huge shift from here to here. Usually you find new diseases, you don't find diseases, so suddenly you realize that's not a disease. And then in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s, it's a legal battle for rights, right? So homosexual rights, for insurance, for wedding cakes, and the whole thing. And then you have for equality a couple years ago when the Supreme Court voted. So that the shift here from 1950s to 2020, in 70 years, you have the fundamental overturning of something that was true for thousands of years. The causes are here, but we are in the bottom of the roller coaster and swinging through. And the major shift is the ideology that you belong to yourself. And the shift is so profound that if you believe that, let's say, homosexuality was a sin, and you're in here and you're looking at those who are same-sex attracted and practicing it out there, and you think, oh man, this is so obvious, how could they, it's that us-them mentality. What he's arguing is now it's flipped. The one who's inside is outside, and the one who's outside is on the inside. In 50 years, a phenomenon, transgenderism, with no traceable history, has taken root in our culture. Those who reject homosexuality, transgenderism, are now viewed as being diseased. In 7 years, it's flopped. In fact, homophobia is a psychological disorder, just as homosexuality was 70 years ago. Now, please, this is a historical. I'm not saying right or wrong. These are not evaluative judgments. I think the issues are far more complicated than right and wrong per se. Of course, we as a church hold certain positions, but the issues are more complicated than what I'm doing. I'm only giving a historical, because we need to understand the history so that when we share the gospel, we want to go for the root, not the... I'm not trying to change a person from being homosexual to non or transgender. That's not my final goal. That's God. I just need him to get to believe in Jesus Christ for his sins, that he can be wiped clean. That's my job.
But the church is being viewed as pathetic.
Well, so hang on to that, right? Yes. Ada is back from her vacation. Welcome, Ada. Yeah. Because part of the church community has brought in individualism. I think that part of Truman's argument is that the church is no better. And then the same thing as last week with Alan Noble. I mean, if you go to church, many times it's just a society magnified with God just put on this declaration. And so I don't want to put them down or what, but there is a part where our church has been influenced by our culture to a degree that we may not be uncomfortable with from our position. But just having said that, so that now, let's see, why am I not advancing? My mouse. My mouse. Why am I not moving with my mouse? One second.
It's back.
Is it back?
Yeah, I see the mouse, the cursor back. And then, can you advance?
Is it reloading or just?
No. The spinning circle next to the.
This guy.
Oh, the spinning circle. Okay, and then view. Oh, right. So that now it's been flipped where those who do not share the same positions are now viewed as having mental neurosis. So here's the fundamental shift that's occurring, where individualism has the freedom for the choices to be made, where the outer reality can be realigned to your inner reality. So we have moved from a world of inherent order to a world seen as raw data where our order can be imposed. Now, there are a number of different factors, but one of them is technology. We have more and more control over our world. It doesn't have to be the way it is. Couple that with the decoupling of the sacred. So decouple God, increase technology for greater control, and you begin to see, wow, the world doesn't have to be the way it is. We can control it, create new orders, new patterns. So Truman says in his class, in the first day, he teaches history, he asks, what caused the 9/11 Twin Towers to fall? He says, well, gravity caused the Twin Towers to fall. Well, is he right or not? Well, in one sense, he's right, but the answer is too generalized to provide any explanatory value. He says most Christians, when you ask them about the sexual chaos in our world, adultery, pornography, and homosexuality, and all of those things, he says most people say sin or the fall. And he says that's the same as saying gravity caused the Twin Towers to fall. It doesn't provide enough explanatory clarity by which you can interact with your culture in a meaningful way. So, this is the change. Is there inherent order in life, or is it all chaos and change? One position or the other? So that if I look on the left, the world of inherent order, generally you believe species are the way it is, and wheat and the DNA that produces the wheat is what it is, and we can discover that all order, or now you can have genetically modified food. I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying it helps you to see we can impose order upon our world. Or if you have organ donation and are not enough organs available, then now you can use different animal species to generate the organs so that it can be planted into human beings. That's a lot of power. I mean, I'm amazed by the stories that come out on the advancements, especially within the genetic world. And then in China, scientists are creating CRISPR babies. That's what I'm reading, MIT Technology Review. So it's genetic editing. So in editing so that you can have designer babies, right? Go to a restaurant, have a menu. Well, so that here, when Chinese researchers first edited the genes of a human embryo in a lab, now in Korea, they're doing it with dogs. So we haven't done human beings, but if you have a dog that died and you love the dog, just bring a sample of the DNA and for $40,000, $50,000, whoa, you can have a puppy that's a genetic copy of. This in 2015, it sparked global outcry, pleas from scientists not to make a baby using that technology, at least for now, because the invention of the gene editing tool, which is cheap and easy to deploy, that made the births of humans genetically modified in vitro is a theoretical possibility. Now it appears like it's happening. We live in a world in which increasingly we can impose order upon the patterns of our world, no longer inherent order. Now, keep that in mind. So now this is Philip Reeve, and this is one of those culturally shifting books. And he argues that there are 4 stages of human development. Now, don't take this as the gold standard. There are different ways you can break up human history, but this is as good as any. There are 4 stages. So he says, in the first stage, in the Greek world, man is seen as a political man. By political, what he means is an individual who's concerned about the issues in your city, politics. Okay, so it doesn't mean politics like we do today, but you should be concerned about the issues that are going on in your city. And the division is between political man and idiot. The word idiot means somebody who is not concerned about the policies of your city. In fact, in one of the illustrations of the word idiot, well, when there was a foreign state that was attacking a city and they called all the citizens to come to have this meeting to defend the city, one of the guys decided, I'm going to keep my store open so that I'm the only one open and I'm going to make more money. And they called him an idiot because he's not concerned about the affairs. So you're the political man, and then the contrast is an idiot. Medieval period, it's the religious man. Your identity is defined by your religious world, your community, your beliefs. It all revolves. In fact, the feast days, run your the calendar, and who you hang out with, all of that, even more than today. And the breakdown is between laypersons and clergy. Laypersons and clergy is the basic breakdown within the religious man. By the time you get to the Industrial Revolution, you have the economic man. So the Industrial Revolution and mass production enabled individual or institutions to be able to create and manufacture things to such a degree at such a price that we can all be consumers to a certain degree. You don't have to be rich anymore. You can live a comfortable life with your salary. And then you are detracted or detached from nature itself. So the order of your world has been created by you rather than you fitting into the order of nature. The reactionary would be Wordsworth and Thoreau. They're writing poetry in order to get us to reconnect here, because living here, you're living in your own creative world. You have ordered your world in an urban context. And the divide is between the blue collar and the white collar, between the 99%er and the 1%er. So it's an economic divide that is going on. But the modern man, what Philip Reeve argues, is the psychological man. We are the psychological man in the modern era. And what he means by that is there's a fundamental shift where he says, and this is Truman, he says, if you are satisfied, are you satisfied with your job? Are you satisfied with your job? Well, 50 years ago or 70 years ago, it's like, I'm happy to have a job. I'm satisfied with a job. Does it put food on the table, right? Can my kids go to school? In other words, it's all outward. Who cares what you feel like? Today, if you're asked, are you satisfied with your job? Immediately, you're going to, what do I feel? Right? How do I feel? In fact, if you take this job survey, so some companies are better to work for, and you have this questionnaire, what you find is the word feeling. Are you recognized for doing a good job? Do you feel or not feel? I don't feel. I am satisfied. I feel something. In other words, it's about feelings because it's your internal reality that assesses whether you belong there or not. So that what Reeve argues, look, religious man was born to be saved. To be saved, you want a priest, right? Psychological man is born to be happy. You want to be happy? See a psychologist. Don't see a priest. They'll make you miserable. So that what you have is that in the political man, it's the philosopher who's the sage. That's why Aristotle, Plato. In the medieval time, it's the priest. He helps you. He teaches you how to connect with God. In the economic man, let's say it's your wealth manager. I mean, how great it is to have a wealth manager that increases your retirement fund, right? And then for the modern man, he argues that it's the therapist. So that what's happening is the inherent medieval man, religious man, political man, you still have inherent order. Plato or Aristotle believed in forms, non-changeable, unchangeable order imposed upon our world. Christianity, obviously God imposing order through the creative act upon our world. So you have inherent order. What's happening here, there are a number of factors for why this disconnect occurs. One of them being Darwinian evolution is a huge player within this. It disconnects you from inherent order to contingent order, which means now how do you order your world when the world is orderable? Well, there's no greater authority than you. You go internal to how you feel and what you want. So if this is the case, and I'm a therapist, and I want you to get in touch with yourself, and you keep telling me what your parents want, what do? I try to create a sense of independence apart from your parents. If you keep telling me what your church tells you to do, that's why I do it, I'm going to disconnect you from your church so that you can live out your values. It's disconnecting as a therapist that's occurring. And in order to do that, I have to forget about this world. In fact, I have to disparage this world so that it no longer competes with your inner world. How do I become authentic when my inner world is there? But if I have oppressive powers pushing it and I keep embracing it, I got to break it apart. How do I break it apart? Forget about it, disparage it, retell the story so that it's no longer believable. That is part of the cultural war in which we are in, where Christianity is directly attacked. If you watch any modern movie today, I'm like, the picture of Christians, I don't know any of those kinds of Christians in my church. In my church, they all seem normal and healthy. But the church, the Christians that are portrayed are either so far out right, usually they're not far out left, that they belong in insane asylums more than they do. The usual portrayal is the guy with the picket fence, walking on Sunday mornings, and you're going to go to hell if you don't believe. If you want to see them, just go to Silver Spring downtown every Saturday morning. There's a lot. So here's how they do it. Thought one, the psychological world, that's individualism, practices forgetfulness of the sacred world. They want you to forget. So this is an illustration. So in the same way that certain aspects of our American culture want to forget about, let's say, the Civil War and the Confederate, they start removing the monuments. Right? That's one way of doing it, which would be similar to removing nativity scenes in public spaces. So you're removing it so that there's a level of forgetfulness that you're not constantly reminded. Then there's a rewriting, the Da Vinci Code. I don't know if you heard this. like 80 million copies sold, 44 languages, where he's retelling the story of what provided sacred order. So that he's arguing that Jesus and Mary got married, and then they have children, and the descendants of the children are still alive. And we read that and then what in the world did he eat last night? But in an interview, he said 99% of it is true. Or absolutely all of it. How much of it is based on reality? Absolutely all of it. Whose reality is he generating this? But part of the motive is to rewrite the story that produced the sacred order so that you can be detached, so that your inner reality can be given expression. That's individualism. And then lastly, you desacratize or sacralize. And this is, my apologies for even showing this, but Piss Christ is the name of the work. It's a crucifix in urine, and the urine is produced by the artist. And the artist, when you listen to him, he says he did this in order to demonstrate the suffering Jesus went through on the cross. I look at this. That's desacratizing what was once a sacred source for the order, because it's disconnecting. So that when you look at our world today, thought number 2, the ordering of the world comes from within you. So that if I feel like a woman, that's a greater reality than my biological reality. And if I really want to be authentic, I should impose my inner reality upon my outer reality. So that now we have a difference between sex and gender, right? Sex is your biological makeup. The World Health Organization Regional Office for Europe describes sex as characteristics that are biologically defined, whereas gender is socially constructed, and no longer are they ordered in some inherent manner. It's disconnected. So that if you're psychologically experiencing your maleness through male inner world experience, then it connects. But if it doesn't, because there's no inherent ordering, you are now free to, more than that, you are responsible to produce your inner reality to your outer world. And then third, therapist enables us to see inward and then gives us the strength to create outward. Therapists are the new priests of our culture. So that gender dysphoria, do you know body dysphoria? Like if you're thin and you look in a mirror and you look fat, that's dysphoria. If you look in the mirror and you look male, but in your mind, your image of yourself that you see is female, and that's a dysphoria that's disconnected. How do you tell if you have gender dysphoria? Look at the language. A marked incongruence from one's experience, expressed gender, primary and secondary sexual characteristics, strong desire to be rid of one's primary and or secondary sexual characteristics, a strong desire for the primary and or secondary sexual, a desire, a conviction. In other words, it's all about your inner world. Because that's your only authority. That's your only authority by which you determine who you want to be. Stage 4, those who seek to restrain this individualization are now psychoanalyzed, so that we are lying on the couch and then being evaluated for our mental health. So that how psychology has helped society accept homosexuality, because they're the new priests of our culture. And the way they helped us to accept it, right, is a third major way that psychology has advanced the rights of homosexual persons is by turning the lenses on those with strong anti-homosexual attitudes. The term homophobic was introduced by Weinberg based on his work with therapy patients. Weinberg concluded that anti-homosexual attitudes are often a real phobia, like agoraphobia, and all the other different phobias that are there, based upon a repressed fear that one is unconsciously homosexual. I can't tell you how often this theme has come out in movies, where those who are strongly anti-sexual, by the end of the movie, it's because they have latent homosexual desires for it. And so what we hate in them is what we're actually hating in ourselves. This is all psychological language. And experimental support, one study found, oh, no, I won't write that part. I can't say that word at church anyway, so. And then when the gay marriage occurred, that language is inputted into the Supreme Court decision. One of the reasons, I think it's the third reason for gay marriage, was that the opposition for gay marriage was based or driven by hatred, bare desire to harm, and bigotry.
Wow.
So there's no language. So maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but the way they frame the opposition is through psychologically explaining it away rather than seeking to deal with it on the level of truth claims. So that right here, instead, the Supreme Court, extending its reasoning in Windsor, could conclude that state law prohibitions on same-sex marriage are invalid even under rational basis scrutiny because they reflect an unconstitutional animus against gays and lesbians, that is, a bare desire to harm a politically unpopular group. A similar evaluation has been carried out, which is a very interesting way for arguing for the rights of one group, is that the other group has unrationally or irrationally have a hatred towards them. I find that language very interesting. So this is part one, and then next week we'll continue to the trace and then how to respond in a gospel message. So that last week, if the freedom is a core value of individualism, when you share the gospel, you have to share it. Not only did Christ set you free from your sins, but that you are called to enslave yourself to God. And then in the same way here, when we talk about the psychological, the response is they don't take sin seriously enough. I think when I bear down the individualized worldview and I evaluate it for weakness, their weakness is that they basically assume that people are decent or good. And when I look at our world, I don't know if that is defensible. So we'll look at that next week. All right. Oh, man, that took longer. We have like 10, 12 minutes. I don't know if there are any responses or
I
thoughts.
couldn't help it, but when you're talking about the, if you lose a pet, you want to recreate it as a true story.